So I'm going to play a short clip of a person totally unaffiliated who verifies the claims of Ron Wyatt regarding aspects of the Exodus story, and particularly the rock at Horeb that fits along with that claim of discovery. Anybody out there disagree? Please tell me why I shouldn't accept these things. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi. I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of this new series on Mount Sinai in Arabia. And today, our dear brother Joel Richardson is going to continue with his compelling evidence to support the notion that this mountain that we've been talking about so far, and we've shown you a couple of images about, is the possible location, if not the location, of the real Mount Sinai. So today we're going to take a look at more evidence, especially supported by biblical passages, as to why Joel and myself combined here, we believe that this is the real deal. So, brother, thank you so much for being here. So you've already talked about Midian, for instance, as one example, and you talked about other things related to that location. Now, what else do you have in your toolbox here that you'd like to share with our viewers as to why you believe that's the location of the real Mount Sinai?
Yeah, so we've talked about quite a lot. Now we're going to actually start looking at specific archaeological sites and petroglyphs and paintings and things like that around the mountain. So the first thing that I think has caught a lot of people's attention is what many people believe to be the split rock, the split rock of Moses, the rock that Moses himself struck with his staff and was split, and then actually gave water to the people of Israel as they were thirsty. Yeah. So I want to start by reading a passage because, again, as Bible believers, the Bible is our most faithful account of what took place. Mm-hmm. And anything on the ground that we look at today, it has to align with the biblical criteria. So the first passage that I think is relevant is Exodus 17, 5-6. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Pass before the people, and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb. And you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, that the people may drink.' And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel." So let me just say this first before we get into this. Within the Exodus narrative, the covenant that was made between God and Israel at Mount Sinai, from a biblical perspective, it is patterned after a marriage or a betrothal ceremony. And so really in a mystical or a metaphorical way, the Exodus is a romance. God mm-hmm. is wooing his people. And so the process of splitting the sea and killing Pharaoh and his soldiers, this is, for all intents and purposes, God is strutting, God is demonstrating his power, his mighty and outstretched hand, and he's quite literally killing the competition. When he splits the sea, it's kind of like, well, can your old boyfriend do this type of thing? And then he drowns the old boyfriend. Mm-hmm. But now that they're on the other side of the Red Sea, what we have is God demonstrating his ability not to be the strong one, but to be the provider, to be the compassionate God that loves his people, that provides for them water when they're thirsty, manna when they're hungry, quail. And, he's taking care of them and saying that he's not just this strong, powerful God, he's also compassionate. And so that's really what is happening here. But an interesting point when we look at this is the Lord says, "I'm going to stand before you there at the rock of Horeb." Now, again, Horeb is simply another name for Sinai. Sinai, right. Horeb, essentially interchangeable. Now, when you look at any place in this whole region, there's nothing but rocks. That's all there are rocks. There's millions upon millions of billions of rocks. So the Lord says, "I'm going to stand before you at the rock of Horeb." It's clear that whatever he was talking about was a widely recognized, well-known landmark. Everyone knew the rock of Horeb. This was not just another rock. This was a clear landmark, okay? And of course, he strikes it and the water comes out. The next passage is Isaiah 48. So at the end of the chapter, Isaiah says, they did not thirst when he led them through the deserts. The Lord made water to flow out of the rock for them. He split the rock and the water gushed. So the word there in the Hebrew is baka. Some translations, I think the King James says clave. He clave the rock. He split the rock. So we're looking for a prominent rock, a well-known, identifiable landmark that has been split. And then it says the water gushed forth. Again, arguably 1 million people. We don't know how many. There was a lot of people out there that needed to be, that were thirsty. Okay, so here's the first picture. As you're driving up to the rock, this is probably from 3/4 of a mile away.
Right.
You can see this thing. Now, from the bottom of this hill to the top of the rock is about 200 feet. Okay, so it is a massive rock.
Now, if you want to stop right here, as a geologist, I can show people, notice the top portion of the mountain is rocky, and notice the second half, the bottom half that looks reddish, that's sedimentation. It's almost like clay. This doesn't happen except when you have water flowing.
Exactly. Yeah, and these are the type of observations that they're easy to miss if you're not a geologist, But there's another factor too, which is probably worth mentioning. Here's another picture. And for what it's worth, you can see me down at the bottom of the base of the rock. The rock itself, just the rock, is 65 feet. Okay, so that's what, 20 some odd meters.
Right.
This is 6 stories tall. This is a massive, massive rock. Now, here's the thing. It's what's called, it's granite. It's what's called rotten granite, which is to say it's fairly porous. But here's the thing. When you look at the rock itself, and again, people can reason through this who are not geologists, and the hill that it's sitting on, that's also granite.
Mm-hmm.
How did that get there? In other words, like if the rock itself was some type of quartz, you could say, well, the granite that it's sitting on was, it eroded over the years and that was but somehow that thing got placed there. It's a very peculiar thing, even,
in other words, what are the odds of finding this description matching the location and the shape of the rock?
Yeah, it's very unusual for sure. I mean, it would be like, even if it had no biblical significance, it's like Arches National Park or something. It's an unusual formation is the point. It matches the biblical criteria, and then indeed it is split from the top to the bottom. You can actually walk right up through it. In fact, we did. Many people have. And so it is split. It's been claved. So you have this incredibly strange landmark. It is the rock at Sinai. It's split down the middle. And then in the next picture, you can see this is at the base when you're standing up there. And again, to be clear, I'm not a geologist, but it really does look like you have massive water erosion.
Right. I mean, you look at these images of these layers, fine layers, look like shale, right? It's almost like you're peeling these layers. And you get best when water is flowing in one direction. Usually the heavy particles will settle first, and then the lighter one will continue down the stream.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And even when you're standing up there, it's hard to capture, but as you look down the hill, it's as though you can see the flow of where the water went. Obviously, it would have gone downhill, but it appears to be where you can see the flow of what once was water gushing out, and that's very unusual.
And it will look like a delta, right? It starts with a tip of an angle, like a triangle, and it starts getting wider and wider at the bottom.
Exactly, exactly. It's fascinating. So now here's another portion of what we should be looking for, because when Israel got to the area where the split rock is, and this is just kind of to the northwest of the mountain itself. So to drive there, it's actually quite a ways from the part of the mountain where they were at the base of the mountain when God appeared. This is on the other side, but this is a place the Bible calls Rephidim. Okay, so in Exodus 17, it says, then Amalek, that's the Amalekites, came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So it's actually where the split rock was that Israel fought against the Amalekites. There was a great battle that took place there. Again, we don't know if there was 1 million people or a few 100,000 Israelites and how many Amalekites, but there was a great battle. Choose for us and go fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him, and he fought against Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur, they went up on top of the hill. So there has to be a very tall hill
Right.
in the vicinity of all of this, and there has to be an area big enough for there to be a massive battle.
And a valley for the battle, or at least plain for the battleground.
Exactly. So it came about when Moses held up his hands. We know the
Right.
story. They had to hold his hands up all night. So here's just a picture that I got from Google Maps. The red dot, of course, is where the split rock is. And you can see there's a massive plain around it. And really, this doesn't do it justice. This plain is about 1.5 miles at the narrow points across and several miles from one end to the other. It's a massive, massive area. In fact, when we were there, I looked across this plain and there was an SUV parked on the other side. You could barely see it. Okay, so you have this area that's big enough for there to have been such a massive battle. I'm going to actually jump back a few slides and see the hills, these massive hills. You could even say they're mountains all around the rock. You have exactly, again, if this is the area, if this is what the Bible describes, everything lines up perfectly.
Right.
So it's fascinating. I mean, there's a lot there. And this is what you find when you're there. And the more that you think about it, as you said, notice the sedimentation. The more that you think about it, the more that you observe, everything just lines up. It falls into place. Nothing is forced. It's just hand in glove. It matches. And you go, either there are an awful lot of coincidences here, or this is it. This is the location.
Now, I want to just point something interesting here. In John chapter 7, the Lord, during one of the ceremonies that are done to commemorate this incident, he stood himself and says, I am basically the water of life. And he who comes to me will not thirst. And I will cause rivers to basically gush or come out of their belly or from within, obviously. And it's interesting, when the Lord asked Moses to do this, is I will stand before you, right? And so technically the water is God's water gushing out basically through the rock. And of course, the Bible tells us that Jesus is the rock, so these are kind of interesting observations as well.
Yeah, I mean, and think about this again. I love Israel. I love going to Israel. I know so many people go, it changes their life. But Israel has been developed over the years. It's been inhabited. So you go to these places, you say, this is where Paul the Apostle did some particular miracle, or where he spoke, or where Jesus did a miracle. Okay, it's all fascinating, but for the most part, most of it has been built upon. The thing about what we have out here in Saudi Arabia is this is not, if you think about this, you think about if this is the real thing, and honestly, I believe it is. You think this is not some place where God did a miracle. You're looking at the miracle itself.
That's right. Yeah.
And not only that, but the Lord has purposefully caused the world to forget about this. He placed it on a pedestal. He placed it on a pedestal for the whole world to see. He's preserved it. It's just sitting there. And he says, oh, and by the way, it's split down the middle. It represents Christ. I mean, it's this living testimony concerning his miracles, concerning prophetically what it represents, who was broken for us. And as you said, out of you will come rivers of living water.
Right.
I am the source of this living water, as the Lord provided for them in the first Exodus. Right. It's an amazing thing. It's awe-inspiring in a profound way.
That's fascinating, brother, and very compelling. So for the next episode, what are we to expect?
So we're going to jump into the actual mountain itself, where Israel camped when they were at the base of the mountain. We're going to continue to go through these various evidences, and we'll jump into, I think we'll hit a couple of them in the next episode.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, brother. As always, people can go, of course, to Joel's website, joelstrumpet.com, and you wrote a book related to this very mountain.
Yep, it's called Mount Sinai in Arabia, and I just released a brand new book called Sinai to Zion, the untold story of the triumphant return of Jesus.
Which we would love to do also a show or two, or maybe even a couple of videos on that as well. So thank you, brother, as always. Thank you for all of you for joining us here. Continue to send us your comments and interactions, and we will do our best to reply back to you or to your question.
Slam, did you leave? Yeah, you can't believe it unless you see it. I'm going to play another short clip of evidence from the Mount Sinai in Arabia that Ron Wyatt put forth in the 90s that everybody laughs at. I'd love to talk to some scholar that says I'm retarded. That'd be great. So if you hook that up, I'm down for it. I'd love to just talk to somebody about, there's so much like physical evidence. I know he's not an archaeologist, but when you see the pathway through and all the highlights and the local cultures and what they say about it, this would be like the greatest hoax of all time. There's no way Ron Wyatt hoaxed it.
Hero shepherd of Israel, come and lead your lambs. Hero shepherd of Israel, come and feed your lambs. Lord, save us, deliver us, O shepherd of Israel. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and lead your lambs. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and feed your lambs. Restore us, revive us, and we will bless your holy name, O shepherd of Israel. Lift up the light of your countenance on us, O Lord. Cause your face to shine on us, and we shall be saved. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and lead your lambs. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and feed your lambs. Lord, save us, deliver us, O shepherd of Israel. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and feed your lambs. Come and feed your lambs. Adonai, let this evil pass over Adonai, come deliver us, your chosen ones. Here in the darkness of the night, Lord, hear your chosen people cry. Through endless years of slavery, our heart's desire is to be free. Adonai, Adonai, let this evil pass over us. Adonai, Adonai, come deliver us, your chosen one. I renounce all idol gods. Every altar must come down. I have made the choice to obey the voice of the God of Israel. I will make no compromise. He is strengthening my will. I will serve no pagan idol gods, only the God of Israel. I serve the God of Israel. Every idol god, every altar must come down. I tear it down. Every idol god, every altar must come down, 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 down. I tear it down. I renounce all idol gods. Every altar must come down. I have made the choice to obey the voice of the God of Israel. I will make no compromise. He is strengthening my will. I will serve no pagan idol gods, only the God of Israel. I serve the God of Israel.
I want to point something out in that shot there that just went by. Right there, I believe that would be the proposed pile of rocks that the petroglyphs are on, etc. Even evidence of something being ground down on the top there. But notice up there in the background, you can see the peak of Mount Sinai. And what does the Bible say? It says Moses could see them from the mountain, right? In the Bible. Just an interesting point.
light of your countenance on us, O Lord. Cause your face to shine on us, and we shall be saved. Hero, shepherd of Israel, come and lead your lambs. Hero, shepherd of Israel, come and feed your lambs. Lord, save us, deliver us, O shepherd of Israel. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and lead your lambs. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, come and feed your lambs. Come and feed your lambs.
All right, one last thing I'm going to show someone who's verified.
Evidence. See, that's powerful evidence to me.
And to any Christian, that
I don't know if you heard that, but I hope you didn't.
Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you to a brand new video series that I believe it's going to be very interesting. The series are entitled Mount Sinai in Arabia, and the reason why we chose this is that there is this basically mountain that is found in the northwestern region of Saudi Arabia, and there is a lot of evidence that collaborate biblical accounts which, in my view, would prove strongly that that could be the real location of Mount Sinai, where Moses basically met with the Lord, and many other biblical accounts and events took place. With me here, a very special friend and a dear brother. His name is Joel Richardson. And the reason why I invited Joel, because he have visited that site multiple times, and he is going also to present to you the evidence by images as well as using biblical passages to show you the collaboration between what the image is showing and what also either the map or the photos would be showing you. And of course, I've known Joel for a very long time, and I am blessed really to find this time to work with him in a video series as this. Joel, thank you so much, brother, for making the time for us. I know you're busy, and I know also you have a passion for these type of topics. And one of the areas that you focus on is biblical prophecies, and I believe this is just up your alley, basically, when it comes to that. So before we dive into this particular topic, why don't you give our viewers just a brief overview about yourself and how did you get into this particular field of prophecy, and why also dealing with Islamic, issues as well.
Sure. Well, first, let me say, Al-Fadi, the blessing's mine. It's good to be here with you. And
Thank you, brother.
I'm looking forward to talking about these things as well. So I came to faith in 1991, and I was raised nominally Catholic, very nominally Catholic, pretty much a hedonist throughout most of my childhood years, and had a real powerful conversion at 1991. And it was shortly thereafter that a missionary had come to the church that I was going to. He was working in Kazakhstan with the poorest of the poor. I mean, he was working with lepers, and, I didn't even know lepers still existed. And he also explained this whole concept of the unreached peoples of the world, people that, hundreds of thousands of them who don't have an active witness concerning Jesus among them. And he explained at the time, again, 1991, that roughly half of the unreached peoples of the world were Muslim. It was like 48%. And the global Protestant missionary force, we were sending less than half of 1% at the time to the Muslim world. And so at the end of his sermon, just sort of in classic Pentecostal altar call form, I really felt the leading of the Lord and the calling, and I knelt down at the altar and I committed my life to the Islamic world. And so that began a 5-year journey of education, and I was getting trained and so forth. In the middle of that, 1994, I spent a year, or better part of a year, really bouncing around between Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. My base of operation was in southern Israel, and I would work construction and then take off to Egypt for a few weeks, this type of thing. So I was kind of dipping my feet in the Middle East, getting to know the people a bit, and falling in love with the Middle East and the people of the Middle East, all people. And then the next phase is what I call life happened. And what that means is I was going to school. I decided in the midst of this, I was going to pursue a degree in engineering, but it's in the midst of that I met my wife. Okay, so life happens. Next thing you know, you're married and there's babies and different things like that. So throughout most of the 90s, I was just working, raising kids, and it kind of became clear during that time that we weren't going to move to the Middle East. Just didn't seem realistic at the time. But again, I was pursuing, reaching out to Muslims, dialogue with Muslims, and I really fell in love with that discussion. Okay, so I was reading books on Islam by Muslim scholars, by a lot of the classic Muslim scholars and so forth. And I was, created some discussion forums and chat groups. And it was this type of thing, the Wild West of the internet, before 9/11. But then it was after 9/11 that we saw this influx. We saw this tremendous influx of Westerners converting to Islam. And it was during that time that I really began discerning that Islam is not just another in a series of what Christians would view as a false religion. We kind of categorize it. Well, if you get Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, this type of thing. But it was then that I began realizing not only is Islam the largest and fastest growing, but it's also arguably the most seductive in terms of there's a legitimate power there. And, I saw people that were raised Christians. Christians often don't like to admit it, but it's true that we're converting to Islam. And so I began discerning a bit more during that time. And then I started studying Islamic eschatology and understanding what Islam teaches in a general way about the end times. Started seeing things in the news like people being beheaded. Started sort of putting the pieces together and ended up writing a lot. I've written quite a lot over the years concerning Islam, its role in Bible prophecy, the role of the Middle East, the role of the nations that surround Israel, where they fit in biblical prophecy, and all of this. So, on one hand, obviously, from a Christian perspective, I've had some critical things to say concerning some of the things that Islam says, which are critical of Christianity. But I really do. I love Muslims. I love the Middle East. And so with regard to this issue of Mount Sinai, it was about 3 years ago that I had the chance to go into Saudi Arabia for the first time. And that's what began me on this whole journey concerning this mountain called Jebel al-Lawz. And it is arguably, I would say, the single most significant story that's unfolding in our time concerning the validation of the Bible, the validation of biblical archaeology. And it's beginning to become big news, but it's going to become far greater news in the years ahead.
And when did that take place? You visited that mountain? Was it recent or?
So we're in 2020. I guess it was actually March of 20. I'm not sure it was 17 or 18.
Okay, so it's recent, basically. What brought it to your attention, by the way, the fact that that could be the location of the mountain?
Yeah. So I mean, as an itinerant preacher, a lot of people come up to me and they show me pictures of this or that. And I've had people show me over the years. There's various Americans that have slipped in and kind of investigated this over the years. And I'd heard about it, but I just didn't have the bandwidth. I didn't have the ability to really dig into this. People were like, what do you think about this? And, you know, every time I saw it, this prayer would kind of rise up in me. And I would say, Lord, I ask that you would get me into Saudi Arabia. I really want to check this out, even though archaeology is kind of outside of my area of specialty. And of course, up until just last year, no one can go into Saudi Arabia unless you have a work visa.
Right.
You need a reason. And so I had a friend that had visited the mountain. He works in the kingdom with one of the oil companies. And I just said, hey, can you get me a visa? Can you get me in? And he said, well, you know, I can arrange for you as a photographer to come in and do some promotional work. And, you know, we'll hire you. And in the process, we can go do some exploring. And I said, let's do it. And so that's what began the journey. And of course, then in light of it, that's when I really started digging in and doing the research. That's when I started looking at all of the historical, all of the academic literature that's both critical of this mountain as the real Mount Sinai and that's in favor of it, and started exploring all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And after going there and after working through all the material pretty tediously for about a year, I'm absolutely, completely confident that this is the real Mount Sinai. And I've had the chance to go back since then. And as soon as this COVID thing is over, I'm looking forward to getting back there again as well.
So why don't you tell our viewers then about this particular series? What should they expect as we begin to unfold, you know, the study and the location and all the other evidence that support that?
So there's a tremendous amount of evidence. And again, for those that are just learning about the subject, there's a lot of information to weed through. And so what I always try to do is, as I said, work through all of the popular literature as well as the academic literature, and then try to boil the academic scholarly stuff down to its simple, most important points so that anybody who's interested can understand it. They can understand the arguments for and against. I like people to be Bereans. I don't try to force anything on anyone, but that's what I'm saying. This mountain sells itself. So we'll work through the historical and traditional evidences. And by the way, there are a handful of other Mount Sinai candidates. There's the traditional site. There's another mountain up in the Negev, southern Israel, that some people, it's called Har Karkum, that some people speculate could be the real Mount Sinai, et cetera. There's a handful.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I try to lay out all the evidence and let people come to their own conclusions, but we'll work through the historical, traditional, the geologic evidences, the archaeological evidences that are seen in the petroglyphs, some of the rock carvings that are around the mountain, some of the I mean, there's just a lot. There's an abundance of evidences, and
Absolutely.
when it's all laid out,
Yeah.
it's an amazing case. It really is.
Well, that's great. I'm looking forward to it, and I think people are going to enjoy really at least assessing the evidence. Again, like Joel mentioned, we're not here to force our interpretation into you, but I think, as I was convinced myself by looking at the evidence, looking at the pictures, by looking at the biblical passages, there is a compelling set of evidence to really point to this particular mountain. And of course, I have to admit, I'm a little biased because it's in Saudi, where I come from. But its location is really peculiar when it comes to its association with Midian, and also the possible location of the crossing over the Red Sea and so many other things. So with that in mind, brother, thank you so much, of course, for giving us this introductory episode about what the show will be about, or the series would be about. And I'm looking forward now to the next one, where we begin to lay out these evidence and also what the Bible says about that location. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, this series is called Mount Sinai in Arabia, and hopefully you will join us, myself and our dear brother Joel Richardson. And in fact, Joel, before we even close this particular episode, I will be remiss if I do not remind people about your ministry and maybe mention some of your books that even relate to the framework of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I actually did write a book on this and released it last year. It's just called Mount Sinai in Arabia. You can get that on Amazon. You can also get it on my website if you want a signed copy. And so online, I can be found at joelstrumpet.com.
Very good. There you go. And hopefully we'll make an effort to try to find some of the images of your book, and we'll show it to people as well. So thank you, brother, and thank you, everyone. Until we meet again, have a blessed. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video.
You're absolutely right. I totally should have edited that down, but I'm lazy, I guess, or I just felt inspired to go through some of this, hoping to draw some people that would. You're absolutely right. I totally should have edited that down, but. So anyways, yeah, if you want to, I'd love to hear from some people that like Rob Rowe, who says, Ron Wyatt, there is zero evidence. Zero. I said, are you sure? Zero? He said, yeah, zero evidence Ron Wyatt found anything. Well, that just tells me you haven't looked at it. And I appreciate Rob very much. But, it's like, even when I asked him on 3 different channels, like Converse Contender and like Rob's channel, CJ's channel, when they were interviewing like Robert Folk, I got the impression that they hadn't looked much. They just heard the rumors based on the details they gave and why they reject it, like about the chariot wheels and stuff. And it's just like, I don't know. Do you dismiss it because it's fundamentalist, young earth creationist, non-mumbo jumbo? I mean, there's just so much evidence if you actually take the time. But yeah, share this with people. I'm really interested in talking about it with scholarly people or people who have any good arguments against it. But I'm going to continue to make these why Ron Wyatt probably found stuff. And I'm hoping to find some people that'll engage with it. And I'll try to be more precise and organized next time. Thank you for coming. I really do appreciate it very much.